Where did I put my pencil? Son of a... Oh, there it is. Hey, I'm going to take this bar top, which originally had square edges, and I'm going to make a simple DIY cutting jig for circles that will give you a radius edge with just a few scraps from your shop.
So before I start to explain what I'm doing here, I'm going to first say I'm sorry for the portrait orientation. I always do this, and sometimes I catch it halfway. This time I didn't catch it until the end, so I couldn't really re-record everything, but you'll just have to take a look at this in portrait mode. I also want to say that this is sort of out of order, so I already cut everything, but I needed to go back and show the preliminary steps. So the first step is to start marking at 12 inches to get the radiuses that I need. This bar top is roughly 30 inches wide, so when I take out 12 inches on each side, it leaves me with about 6 inches of flat at the end. So after I've got all the pieces marked, and I'm just about done here, I'm going to take a drill, and I'm going to drill 2 holes right where those crosshairs intersect at the 12-inch mark. After I drill those holes, which I'm pretending to do now, I'm going to take a piece of scrap wood and sort of just get it to a rough length that I need. This was achieved by putting one end of the board just proud of the hole that I just drilled, and the other end housed the router so that I could get a decent length. The length doesn't really matter at this point. You want it to be a little bit longer than it needs to be, so I added a few inches onto the total length. So the next portion is taking the router and sort of sizing it up on that piece of scrap wood, just to see how it looks. And then I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm going to encompass the bit on the base of the router. I'm going to put a decent amount of tape on this base, and that is to create enough surface area so that when I go to do the next step, which is glue it to the piece of wood, I'm not actually getting any of the glue on the base itself. It all stays on the tape. So now I'm going to take some CA glue and I'm going to apply a bit on the base. I keep it sort of central to the tape so that it doesn't squeeze out, and then I'm going to take some accelerator and spray the piece of scrap. And finally, I'm going to take the router base then, and I'm going to sort of tilt it down onto the scrap piece so that it doesn't prematurely stick. And then I'm going to take it and just sort of put a little bit of pressure on there. So the piece of scrap wood glued to the base of the router is a surprisingly strong bond. So I did test out the bond between the router and the piece of scrap wood, and it worked really well. There were no rattles, so I did that before I actually started it up and started plunging. And this is what I call my patented reverse plunge. So normally you have the router sitting with the base on the ground and you could sort of plunge down. But in this case, I want to plunge through the piece of scrap. So I just want to keep turning the collar until the bit pops through. As soon as that bit pops through, I can take it over to the bar top and orient that bit in the direction that I want it to be in relation to the bar top. And here I'm showing how the widest part of the blade wants to sit on the edge. Now that I've got the router positioned with the blade hitting the edge of the bar top, I want to take that line that I drew earlier at 12 inches and transfer it to the piece of scrap wood. And remember, this does correspond to the hole that I've already drilled. I'll then take a square and transfer a line that corresponds to the same line at 12 inches that I drew on the bar top. Then I want to get the total dimension, the width of the scrap piece, and divide that by 2 just to get the center, where the actual screw that I'm going to show you in a minute will go into the hole that is drilled into the bar top. And here I'm showing that the crosshair on the piece of scrap now is going to correspond with the hole that was already drilled in the bar top. So now I take my jig, my piece of scrap, and I screw it with a drill bit. It doesn't really matter the size, it can be a little bit oversized to give a bit of wiggle room for the screw. And the key is then I'm going to use a countersink bit so that that screw can sort of sit down in tightly while still giving me a bit of wiggle room to rotate the whole jig. Then I'm going to take the jig back over to the square piece of bar top and I'm going to screw it down and sort of just see, make sure that everything looks good. And after I validated that everything looked good and it was running smoothly, I started to take the bit and I would lower it down. I took many shallow passes at this. I really wanted to ensure that I didn't get any tear out or splinters or anything that would mess up the face of the bar top. After I plunged my router about halfway through the piece, I then took my jigsaw and cut within that routed area. The cut with the jigsaw doesn't need to be perfect, and it really shouldn't be perfect because now I'm going to take a router bit with a bottom bearing. I'm going to flip the top over and I'm going to use the reference from the other router bit that I used so that the bearing can ride along and flush up the rest of the way. After all the routing's done, really the only thing left to do is take a sander with my right angle attachment and just go over it with the varying grits and get it smoothed out.
So here's the completed piece. It's got two 12-inch radius edges. I didn't spend any money on any fancy jigs. The only downside is that there's one specialized piece just for this radius. But in the future, I could just make another one at whatever radius size I want. Or maybe if I start to do these more often, meaning circular tops or radius edges, I'll just buy one of the adjustable circular jigs from Rockler or any other woodworking store. So I hope this helped out. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Also subscribe if you can. It helps me out a lot. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Hey, here's my pencil.